Good morning. On behalf of my colleagues, I have the privilege of presenting a critical review of the current governance framework on research involving human biological specimens in Malawi. So, for those of you who've never been, uh, Malawi is that small country in Southern Africa that sits between Zambia, Tanzania, and Mozambique. If you recall nothing else, just know that it's where Madonna adopted her kids. So, in terms of the research governance structure in Malawi, so the government of Malawi passed the National Commission for Science and Technology Act in 2003, and it set up the National Commission for Science and Technology. This is the chief advisor, coordinator, and regulator of all science and technology activities in the country. With respect to research, the NCST delegated its oversight role to two entities. One, the National Health Sciences Research Committee, which is responsible for studies of national interest, including multi-center drug and vaccine trials, and all other studies that don't involve faculty, students, or affiliates of the College of Medicine and Kamuzu College of Nursing. The other research ethics committee is the College of Medicine Research and Ethics Committee, whose main oversight role is over studies conducted by students, affiliates, and faculty of the College of Medicine and Kamuzu College of Nursing. Together, these three have, over time, developed guidelines, regulations, and forms that help in the development and conduct of biomedical research in the country. Some of these guidelines have language that is specific to research involving stored human biological specimens, and that is the basis of the governance framework in Malawi. So the general guidelines on health research were published in 2007, and they state that researchers should not collect specimens not required to address the study objectives. And a test on specimens should only be as in the approved proposal, and specimens collected for a particular purpose should not be used for any other purposes. It also goes on to further says that any tests that are done on specimens should be done locally by local researchers and professionals, and samples can only be exported under exceptional circumstances. The policy requirements, procedures, and guidelines for the conduct and review of human genetic research in Malawi was published in 2012. And it specifically classifies permissible and non-permissible forms of research. Among the non-permissible forms of research include specimen collection for future unspecified genetic research or analysis, any plans, attempts, or requests to obtain specimen for future research. However, specimens can be exported under exceptional circumstances, and there are three which are stated. One, where there is lack of technological capacity to conduct the tests, where there is need for validation of results or quality control. And a material transfer agreement is required to facilitate export of specimen. Another requirement is that genetic research can only be done in collaboration with local researchers. So in 2014, the National Commission for Science and Technology summarized all these guidelines into a memo which was circulated to researchers. And they basically said, collection of specimens for future unspecified research is not permitted. Consenting of participants for collection of specimens for future research use is not permitted, and specimens that are collected can be stored for a period of 5 years. Any requests to store specimen beyond this period requires approval from a research ethics committee. Analysis must be done locally unless otherwise not possible. Again, going back to those three conditions which are given. They also require a material transfer agreement. And it is stated that at the end of the 5-year period, if there has not been permission given to store samples beyond that time, specimens must be carefully discarded or destroyed, even though there are no provisions for proof of specimen destruction. So, from an ethical point of view, we feel that denying participants the right to consent, even for whether their specimens can be used for future unspecified use, denying their right to autonomous decision making undermines the principle of respect for persons and may be viewed as unnecessarily paternalistic. We also know that technology is continuously improving. There are much more analysis that can and will be done on specimens, and this potentially increases the value of these specimens. We also know that during specimen collection, resources are used, human, uh, material, and financial resources. Given this, to simply discard specimens would amount to wastage and failure to maximize the full benefits, which diminishes the value of these specimens to not just researchers, but even the communities that provided them. So what do we recommend? One, we feel that research participants should be allowed to consent to future use of stored human specimen. This respects their autonomy and it certifies the principle of respect for persons. However, we are mindful that there are different modes of informed consent and a discussion will need to be had on the most appropriate form. Currently, Malawi only allows specific informed consent. Keeping with informed consent, the current guidelines regarding general research make provisions for individuals with diminished capacity or decision making. However, there is no reference to specimen collection for future unspecified research, and this is also something that should be considered in the development of the next guidelines. This should be done with the community in mind. We have already heard about the benefits that have been had from robust community engagement, and we advocate for the same to develop guidelines that are ethically, socially, and culturally sensitive and acceptable by the communities with whom we work. So, yesterday we heard a presentation which says that belief in witchcraft is common in Africa, and Malawi isn't immune to this. It's just that for us, every once in a while, superstition mixes in with economic and political anxieties, and we tend to get flare ups of violence. The latest episode occurred in 2017, where vigilantes killed some individuals that were suspected of being bloodsuckers. And among people most commonly suspected were health workers and researchers because our job involves not sucking of blood, but collecting blood samples. So, personally, I was working as a study coordinator then. We had to suspend tracking our tracing activities, and we also had to make sure that we were only transporting samples during the daylight or in the morning when we heard that there were no disturbances, because there were roadblocks to search vehicles for any blood products. So it shows that there is a great need of public education so that people understand the science behind the work that we do. And lastly, given that the current MTA documents do not have provisions for proof of specimen destruction, this is something that should also be included to minimize any risk of misuse. In conclusion, we have the governance framework. However, some of the requirements are narrow and restrictive, hence they may hinder research. And so there is need for a clearer guiding policy which balances the dual need to foster and promote research, but also to provide the necessary oversights and protections. Thank you.
You mentioned that the MTA does not include a requirement for destruction or proof of destruction. Does it include any requirements for getting permission for any onward or other use? And does it include any requirements or at least agreement to return the sample if requested?
Yeah, it does include requirements to return the samples. And also, with regards to further use, it doesn't have any clause to say you can use the samples for any other purposes in the future. But they say if you haven't done all the tests you needed to in these 5 years, you can be granted another 5 years within which you can do the test or analysis, but not for any other use apart from what was originally intended.